Now, something I saw on the internet that I didn't like was what Corey and Brennan were talking about in Friday's podcast, where they went with Greg Huss talking about where MLB Pipeline has some of the prospects ranked. And everybody has the same 3 in the top 100 for the Cubs. Literally, I think if you went to your next door neighbor and said, hey, who's your top 100 prospects? They would list those 3 in the top 100, just in a different spot. But, and Keith Laws came out today, and he had Brennen Davis at 50. But what they were talking about with Greg Huss was that now MLB Pipeline has moved Brennen Davis because of injuries last year down into the 90s.
Yeah.
That doesn't
92, right?
seem fair for a guy. I know everybody loves PCA, and I love the idea of PCA. But just because a guy was hurt for a year doesn't mean he's not still the top prospect in the organization necessarily either.
Right.
Like, I'm not evaluating him versus PCA. I'm just saying, how does a guy go from 28 in Keith Laws to 50 this year? And I don't know where he was in MLB Pipeline last year, but to go from knocking on the door of the major leagues, the Cubs' top prospect, down to in the 90s, I hope he makes them eat their words.
He was a top 20 prospect in all of baseball going into last season, and then moved down in the middle of the season because of injury, and then just now this newest ranking from MLB Pipeline moved him into the 90s. I'm pretty sure that's how it played out from a time frame. So as far as MLB's ranking, my 2 cents is that there's just a lot of really good prospects coming up. So he didn't have anything to show last year. When he played, he didn't play well, and then he was hurt. And so you see other guys from other organizations take a bigger step. So that's to me that's kind of how things work out. Ryan tweeted it out, like the rankings, and I quote tweeted and said, I hope someone takes this tweet and slabs it on his locker and puts a chip on his shoulder, man. Like, he's got a lot to prove. A lot of people, I know he's still in the top 100, but to fall from a top 20 prospect all the way to almost outside the top 100, to me, that's telling. And so I hope, not that he needs any motivation, but I hope it's just extra motivation for him going into spring. As you said, with Rich and his photos, he's already in Arizona. That's awesome to hear. So I hope he saw this and has a huge chip on his shoulder to prove, like, hey, I was almost here. So that's my 2 cents on MLB's rankings. And with Keith Law, I guess it made me feel a little bit better, but whatever. We've talked about this before. Everyone has different opinions on rankings and stuff. And I've said before, I don't follow the minor leagues like guys like Greg Huss and Greg Zumak like enough to know, like, oh, this guy is far and away a top 50, and this guy's, he should be outside the top 100 for this guy. Like, I'm always going to be honest about it, and I'm just glad the Cubs have the 3 in there. Some people can argue that maybe more deserve to be in, but again, every organization has good prospects coming up. Almost every good organization does. So that's the way that I look at it, to keep myself from getting too high and too low on it.
Yeah, well, my 2 cents, the Brennen Davis part of it is like the fall from, I don't remember exactly how high he was ranked last year, but the fall all the way to 92, it seems unfair. Like Lou was saying, like it feels like a little too steep to completely knock a guy that, had the June back surgery. Like, that was affecting him, clearly was affecting him before that, affected his ability to play. And then, the Arizona Fall League. So he ended, I think it was 5 games in the Arizona Fall League before he told us at the Cubs convention that he kind of just felt some soreness and just figured it wasn't the time to push it at that point in the season. So I think the biggest knock, or the biggest reason for the MLB Pipeline to be putting him as low as 92 is because he missed pretty much the entire season with injuries. And, anytime you hear back surgery, it's never a great thing, even though the Cubs said, for what it was the best case scenario,
and not structural, right? It's
not structural.
He doesn't have a disc problem. I said disc problem. It was like a vascular thing. Like, it had nothing to do with the guy having like a traditional back problem.
Yeah, no, so it wasn't like I said, as far when you hear the words back surgery, it was kind of best case scenario in that sense, and the Cubs have said that. But yeah, I don't know how, and like I'm not a prospect guru. I don't know how someone gets dropped, was it 60 some spots in just the matter of a season. But obviously, you know, MLB Pipeline sees things differently than I do or than we do, right? But in terms of like why the Cubs only have 3 prospects in the top 100 in most top 100s, I mean, I think there's just so many guys. And the Cubs have a lot of good prospects. They don't have a ton of superstar, can't miss guys. They don't really have any of those, but they don't have a ton of just like
ready.
guys. Yeah, at least that are ready. But they do have really good prospects in there that really have built up this depth in the farm system. And you might have a few guys that are just like a few steps back of being in that top 100, like maybe in the top, and like, you know, in the one like just past 100, 110s, 120s, even like guys that with good seasons could rise into that top 100 pretty quickly. But they're just, you know, borderline. They're barely outside of the top 100, right? We don't know those lists don't rank beyond 100, so we don't know where some of these other Cubs prospects landed. But I can see that there's a few that with good seasons could find themselves in the top 100 pretty quickly. I mean, a guy like Cade Horton's so high on a lot of these lists. I mean, he was number 4 in MLB Pipeline's rankings. He didn't even play a game when they updated it last season. He didn't play a game in the Cubs system, and he was number 4 for the Cubs. So if he comes out and he balls out in the minor leagues, he might find himself in the top 100 pretty quickly, right? Like, so that's things like that change. And just because the Cubs only have 3 top 100 doesn't mean they don't have a lot of pretty good prospects in that system.
The one thing that Keith Law did post that I found interesting in his little article, and again, he suggested that Brennen Davis, since bulking up, had lost his speed and now projected as a right fielder, could project as a right fielder, which raised my eyebrows because Say is in right for the near future, right? Like, and yes, I could see how he could come up this year and really impress. And if they decided to move on from Ian Happ in left field, I could see Brennen Davis playing some left field. But the position that's open right now is center field until PCA arrives. Center field is the one that's open. I know Cody Bellinger is there. It's interesting to see how players' bodies develop, and somewhere where you thought a guy was going to be, he might not necessarily be when he gets there. So I'm not going to pin him down or pencil him down for any specific position in the outfield other than to say a non-structural back injury seems to me like a long way to drop a guy for someone who hasn't had back injuries outside of that. It's not Anthony Rizzo having a back injury at the major league level that creeps up every year, back injury. This is the guy had something develop and it bothered him for a whole year and it took his year away, but they think they have it solved.